we've got a bit of a new concept, a new podcast here in Dubai. We've got three people. So myself, Jeremy, who was on the podcast on, I think, episode 2 or 3, quite a few months ago. And we've also got the fantastic Jackson Litchfield, who was, I think, number 17 on the podcast. So welcome.
Kind of pick later, you know.
Yeah.
After all the good players were picked.
So I think today we're just going to do a bit of an off-the-cuff talk, just about anything. So it's going to be open style, free-flowing conversation. And yeah, we'll hand over
we'll get started. So
to
exactly,
you guys.
I think there's more specifics. So it took us a little bit to get organised, but here we are. And I'd say the start of this is probably what most people want to know. So I'd probably just touch on our backgrounds a little bit more. We all started working together about 10 years ago in Melbourne, and it was in the corporate district. So basically what we were faced with is training a lot of people with not much time. We also trained a lot of people that had probably arguably spent, a lot of years at university and straight into quite a demanding job. So what we were left with is, we got a lot of people that were newcomers to the gym. And then obviously over the years, we've probably collected a lot of information and strategies that basically take someone that maybe hasn't trained for a while into like, okay, so you probably have an outcome, you've worked quite hard for most of your life. And then, you have a certain, say, expectation of what you want to do with your health. But the problem we probably all found and we're faced with on a regular basis is like, where do you actually start? So, it's like there's so much information, whether it's right or wrong on the internet, friends. And to be honest, a lot of it works, a lot doesn't work. So what we're going to try to do for you today is give you guys all the unique perspective. In our experience combines roughly about 30 years of how to step in from, you've got something in mind that you want to achieve and exactly how to lay that out. So you've never trained for a while, you want to do something, whether it's body composition, health, disease prevention, maybe you have some symptoms that show up like brain fog, fatigue, you name it, anything like that. And what we really want to touch on today is how to take you from not knowing where you are, so the absolute unknown, and giving you kind of some variables that make it known. So how to step into a regime. Yeah. And probably in the next hour, we're going to touch on nutrition, maybe some supplementation, and some movement strategies. Yeah. So if I was to probably say, ask Cubbo first, like you get a guy that walks in, hasn't trained for a while, what kind of questions do you ask and what do you want to kind of introduce them to?
Yeah, well, I think also having us three here today is good because we might get people to the same destination at the end, but we certainly don't have the same methods. And we've all sort of done a little bit different in terms of study and how we get people to actually to the end goal. So for me, I guess I start, and I spoke to Jackson about this in his podcast, and he, I think, has the same sentiments. It's more the connection that I have with them initially. So I sit down and try and have a conversation with them, and whether that's for half an hour, 45 minutes, and I'm just trying to attain what they're trying to achieve, whether it's body fat percentage, whether it's general health, whether they have something specific, whether it's a date that they're actually specifically working towards, and just trying to uncover what it is. Because a lot of times, like, you'll see someone and they might not necessarily give you the straight answer in terms of this is what I want. It might take a little while in terms of building up trust. Yeah. And I guess over the time that you spend with them, you get a little bit more sort of empathy with them. They sort of would have a little bit more trust with you. So in that sort of first initial period with someone, it's just conversation is where I start with someone.
I would say it's the first step for probably all of us, obviously known you guys for a while, is establishing the outcome. And then also understanding possibly the variables that person has in front of them, i.e. if they have a family, what their health history is. And, some people have more aggressive goals than others, and some people have more aggressive timeline. So I'd probably ask Jeremy, what kind of strategies do you use to establish, the outcome and, basically just getting clarity from the outcome? I think we probably all agree that's number one. And what kind of questions would you ask, or would you want, say, people listening today to start to ask themselves maybe?
Well, I think most people, when they first obviously join a gym, it's generally some sort of like aesthetic goal, whether it be to lose body fat or gain muscle mass. So I think if you ask anyone straight off the bat, why are you here? It's going to be, I want to get lean, or I want to put on muscle, or I want to lose weight. So I think finding out sort of a little bit deeper than that, like why do you want to lose weight? Why do you want to get lean? Why do you want to add muscle? And then I guess you get a bit more information about what sort of person they are. If they like Jackson said, has time constraints with work or family or whatnot. So, I mean, generally with most guys or girls, I obviously focus on nutrition a lot primarily.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of grey area there in terms of where someone needs to start, but I really don't think there should be any grey area. For like nutritional basics, I think it's pretty black and white. Like, there's foods that you need to eat on a weekly or daily basis, and then foods you probably should cut out regardless of what your goal is.
Yeah.
I think those foods that need to cut out, in my opinion, are mostly high refined carbohydrates, oils like vegetable oil, canola oil, soybean oil, and then most sort of like simple sugars.
Yeah.
I think from there you can get a pretty good base of health, not from counting calories, not from weighing any food, just eating whole foods as opposed to like processed or semi-processed foods.
Yeah, and I think what you said there was quite powerful in the beginning. It's like you uncover why someone's actually trying to do that, whether they're trying to lose weight for a wedding or for a thing, then you're creating something that you can bounce off and you can say to them at a later date, this is why you're doing this exercise, this is why, because you relate it back to their goal and their target, which is a powerful thing.
Exactly. I think we can redirect this, and I kind of got the framework, and it seems like we all do the same thing. So it's probably step one is understanding the result. Like Jeremy said, probably most people come for an aesthetic result, but I think most people soon realize that it's got to be a little bit deeper than that when it comes to health and whatever and lifestyle change, but we'll get into that in a minute. And then probably the thing that we all kind of touched on there, but let's give it clarity, is purpose. So the reason exactly why you're here. Maybe you want to be a better father, maybe you want to look better in the mirror, maybe you're a single guy or girl and you want to meet someone, so then obviously you have to have a certain standard. So I'd say there's a result and an outcome we're after, then the purpose, maybe the why, because I think there's so much good information on knowing your why, and I think it's very valid. And then the last one, which Jeremy started to delve into, is like your action plan. And I use that RPM, which the M stands for massive action plan. And probably I'm just now delving into Jeremy's point about nutrition. I think that's probably where we all start because fundamentally I think that's what, you are what you eat. And, essentially if you create an environment through nutrition, the body's kind of ready to receive any message that you want to give it. And just going over that, I do the exact same thing as Jeremy, and I think so do you, Cubbo. It's like you eliminate the common food intolerances. And I think a lot of us were introduced to that because I think all of us believe in like a lot of blood work and whatnot. And it's just the common allergens, corn, dairy, gluten, wheat. No, wheat is gluten. Hydrogenated oils, soy. So if you look at them, they're the most common inflammatory foods. So if you take our biases out of it, and you look at what the data says, I think you'll find most food intolerance panels around the world, whether it's IgG or MRT, IgG is immune and MRT is inflammatory, will give you that information exactly. Yeah. So just a little bit about what Jeremy was saying comes from. It actually comes from a lot of data that supports that. And that's usually, there's a multitude of reasons why those foods are inflammatory, but most of the time it's got to do with just really sort of low end kind of the food industry, the ugly side of it, where, people are just punching out, produce for maximum profits. And I wouldn't really touch that too much, but we'll go into more principles about food in a minute. But
I think also when you start with food as well, you can, when you first sort of clean it up, you get people thinking a little bit clearer as well.
Can I ask a question? I'd love to hear both of you answer this because, everyone's heard of this. And it'd be interesting to see if we have the same answer or different answers. Everyone always says it's 80% food, nutrition and 20% training. Do you guys agree with that? Or?
I'm not a big fan.
You've heard it though, right?
I've heard it before. I'm not a big fan of saying, it's exact in terms of like, it's 80-20. But I definitely think that you can train really well and get a minimal result, or you can not train at all and eat really well and get a maximum result. Yeah. So I definitely think that nutrition plays a bigger role than training does, but I think you really need both if you really want to get serious about a result. Like if you're really committed and dedicated, I think you need both factors to work in your favour to get the most out of it. Yeah,
and I'd agree with that. And if you look, the science actually backs that up. If you look at longitudinal studies over like 10-year period where they'll look back, it's the people that have had the intervention of exercise as well that have the sustained weight loss. Now, it's not to say that if you do exercise that you're not going to have some sort of rebound put on the weight, but it usually comes with the lifestyle. So when people train, the food for me, so if I'm training, I sort of crave a little bit more of the proteins and the fats and the sort of healthy stuff. When I'm on holidays, you sort of fall into bad habits, you might not train. And I can see very easily how people would fall into that habit of not eating well and not training.
I'll just add my little perspective on that one. The way I kind of laid it out to clients is exactly what you guys said. The story I kind of tell is that I would say fundamentally nutrition gets the body in an environment where it can receive a message. I think a lot of people don't realize to put on muscle tissue or lose body fat, it's the last thing that the body wants to do. So to give an example, if there's stress or inflammation, your cells and all your energy has to basically, it's taken up to address that before it even looks at losing body fat or building muscle. So we have to assume that nutrition fundamentally puts your body in a phase where it's ready to receive a message. And then of course training will send the exact message you want. And then, so I think it's a nice play between the two, and the training will determine, hey, grow some muscle or lose body fat. And we'll delve into training later on, but you pick your training stimulus based off your outcome, and that's not received unless the body is nurtured in an environment to do so. So it's probably, we're on the same page here. There is a nice play that, it's definitely the two need to work in synergy. Otherwise, there is no shortcuts with that. You will pay a consequence of a bad diet or a not a well thought out training program. And I probably would stress that. A lot of people say, any movement's good movement, and I agree to a certain point, but then I'd also argue that you really want to sort of maximize your time training. So you want to pick a proven method that's going to get you an outcome. So, we know, aerobic and lactate training might get fat loss, but if you're strength training, hoping for fat loss, that's not going to work. And we'll delve into some specifics and hopefully give the listeners a little bit more framework later, because it's one of the most exceptional things. I think training is very underestimated, like Jeremy said. I think you really need to send the body the right message to change, otherwise it just won't do it.
Yeah. So I'd just like to ask you guys, what, in terms of if you get someone who comes in and they might have had, say, a bad diet and lifestyle for 10 years, what would your intervention be in terms of nutrition? What would the starting point be? So just say they've got a real bad diet.
Great question, yeah.
What, I guess in terms of habit change, because this one always, it doesn't work for everyone, and you'll try one method with one person, it might work, and I'll try a different method with someone else.
And it's pretty easy to have a bad diet now, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Bad food tastes good.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in how you sort of intervene and how you'd start. For me personally, I always start with one or two things, whether it's hydration.
So two variables that you'll then change.
I wouldn't change more than two initially, just when I'm working with someone, if they're coming from a real bad background. Or
not conducive background to their goal.
Yeah,
because I've had periods where I've just been following the wrong diet for many years. So I'd say there's no bad, but there's definitely misguided backgrounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Call it. Yeah.
No, we'll come from a highly refined,
exactly.
Lots of alcohol, that sort of stuff.
And we've all been there, like us as trainers. I'd put my hand up and say I did that for many years as well, not knowing exactly the full effect of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So to answer your question, Jeremy, go first.
Yeah, I think that you have to start with, like we said before, eliminating the simple stuff that everyone, or maybe the client doesn't know that we know.
So common food intolerances. Let's put that somewhere too for the listeners, Cubbo, if we can. The list of common food intolerances. Yeah. Because it seems like it's a core strategy for all of us.
But I use something called the whole food diet. So I don't really count anything. I just say these are foods that are single ingredient foods. So it doesn't matter if they're potatoes or rice or vegetables or some form of fish or meat. You can eat pretty much any of those you want, as long as you don't have foods that have too many ingredients. Yeah. So I call it a whole food diet, single ingredient diet. So all foods that are either plucked, grown, used to run or swim. Yeah.
Primitive foods.
Yeah, pretty much stick with those for the first sort of 4 weeks. And I think within those 4 week periods, someone could obviously initially they're like, I want to look better. But I think within a 4 week period of eating really well, they feel better. And after you start feeling better, obviously we spoke before about the inflammation and those markers sort of going down. That's when those pathways open up for when you can burn body fat and can build muscle, because that message is getting through.
So you wouldn't necessarily pick a thing, or like in terms of whether it's hydration, you just go the whole principle and go whole foods?
Yeah.
This is how you start.
Yeah, I generally give them guidelines, like not a strict nutrition plan, like with the grams or anything like that, but like a sample meal plan along with a guide of what sort of foods are good, what sort of foods you should avoid.
Yeah, and that's dependent obviously on their outcome they want, whether it's fat loss.
I think that I think the hydration goal is a good one, but I also feel that people want to see a result yesterday, so they want to get a result straight away. Yeah. They want to eradicate 2 years of bad choices in 12 weeks. Yeah. So like I'm trying to do that as fast as possible, and if that means not taking extreme measures, well, I don't think it's an extreme measure by doing the whole food diet. Then
your body's pretty forgiving.
Yeah, that's what I generally go for.
Yeah.
So I would say I'd start with an overall strategy. So the big one for me, and probably a lot of the clients, is number one is just tell the truth. Because a lot of us don't realize, myself included, exactly what you eat. So for instance, I think the first variable is to actually lay out what you're eating, when you're eating it, and just take a look at what that looks like. So we'll have a look at the patterns, and then so everything's laid out, it's exactly what it is. Because often we eat unconsciously, we eat for emotional reasons, and just so everyone knows, I mean, I definitely do. If I'm a little bit stressed, I can't, subconsciously you start putting things away. So the first thing is to tell the truth and have a look what that looks like. The second one, if you go back to what we first spoke about, is knowing your outcome. So we've got two variables in play here. We've got the exact what's going on right now. Like if you ate 10 Snickers bars at lunchtime, we don't really care as long as it's there and that's what's going on. And then we look at maybe the end result that we're after. And then so we really lay that out. And then that result should be something really compelling. So the person's decided, I want to be like that, I want to feel like that. And then I guess everything's reverse engineered for me. So basically the strategy is based on where they are now, where they want to go, and that's reverse engineered. And then you both said the same thing. And then you have to kind of pick probably only a few things that the whole is going to make the biggest difference. So the first few changes should be for maximum return of investment. And again, touching on what Jeremy said, and this is probably why it's good with all three of us here now, is I don't blame everyone for wanting results yesterday, because two things can happen. One, the body is very forgiving, so you can get results pretty fast if you plug the right strategy in. Now there's certain circumstances where it doesn't happen because of rare thyroid conditions, cortisol, adrenal fatigue, stuff like that, and we can touch into maybe complications on the next podcast. But you change a few things that you think the whole operation is sensitive to. You track that trend. You have a look if you're making progress, and then again you just keep changing the number one or the top two variables that will make the biggest difference. And whether it's hydration, sleep is an underestimated one. There's so many variables of I'm with kind of both you guys. Get rid of anti-inflammatory foods, and then the whole foods diet. And then I think just lastly to sum what I'm saying up, is when you introduce people, like food is essentially information. So when you eat it, it creates some kind of effect in the body. So I think, on Jeremy's strategy, I also pretty much do the same thing. When they start to eat whole foods, okay, not only do they lose weight, but they actually start sleeping better. I mean, I've had people's watches be looser because their joints are less inflamed. They wake up with morning energy, which is obviously reported as quite low. So they sleep better, they wake up better. And we'll kind of run you through all the markers, like in terms of the endocrine system, digestive health, skin health, hair health. Everything generally gets better when you switch to like a whole foods diet. But again, I think the overall summary is where you are now, where you want to go, and then reverse engineering the strategy. And it's dependent because someone could be fitter than the other person, but I think that's probably where the magic is, right? Is picking the right two variables that make the biggest change.
Yeah. And I find with a lot of guys that I see in DIFC is there's like a continuum of behavior change, and you can have someone who come in and say, tell me exactly what I want to, what to do. Yeah. And so you'll plug in everything, you'll go, this is what you do. And then obviously they'll get a fantastic result, but then you'll see someone who's probably a bit more resistant to change, and you have to build up a little bit of trust. And it goes back to what Jeremy was saying is you want to give them a result. So if you give them a result on something limited, and then they'll have a little bit more compliance to do what you tell them to do a little bit later. And obviously they're coming to see you for a specific reason, for a goal. But I've found a lot of the guys that I see might be adverse to supplements. Just for example, they'll be like, I don't know where they get in their head, but they think that supplements like
Well,
drugs
it's
or
pitted as the medical industry, right?
yeah.
Essentially it's nutrition.
And so I see quite a few guys like that, and I don't go in with sort of all guns blazing at the start and say, you guys need to take this, you need to take this. I'll get some sort of results initially, and then I'll send them for blood tests. They'll come back, and inevitably they'll be low in like vitamin D and something like that. And so that's an easy fix, and they'll do that, and then they'll start feeling better.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess maybe a little bit different to you guys in terms of I might not go in with everything at the start.
Yeah, certain things based on the client. So it should be bespoke. We could probably all sum up. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So just to give clarity to the listeners here. So we started with basically your outcome, your plan, and then we've delved into like what most likely will be the changes. But just so everyone knows, there's so many strategies, but basically it's like picking something that's going to give you the biggest return. That's where we sort of sit with nutrition.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've basically decided that that's how you should step into nutritional strategies. So possibly let's maybe explore some nutritional strategies that you like and possibly why, even though, basically food plans, diets, anything like that you think, you use more often. So like, whether it's the 14-day elimination diet, something like that. So, we've mentioned the strategy and belief and say structure of choosing the strategy. What kind of strategies do both you guys use after that? And like, let's try and be a little bit more specific so that people can get an idea. Like, do you use like ketogenic diets? Do you use intermittent fasting? Maybe just throw some methods out that you like so people can sort of start to explore it.
Yeah. So with me, in terms of specific diets, ketogenic diets I've recommended before and I've done with some of my clients, but I would sparingly ever recommend a ketogenic diet. It's just because it's quite hard to follow, and I know how tedious it is to actually get into ketosis. And I think if you're working as a corporate, as most of my clients are, it's not impossible because you could do it.
Yeah.
But I definitely wouldn't lead with that one. In terms of what I'd recommend initially,
just before you run into that, so I'm just going to give you a little bit more clarity to what I said. So basically, we've made the kind of lifestyle adjustments.
Yeah.
So everyone's now introduced to what good foods are, what whole foods are. Yeah. Then this is the specific phase. Yeah. So is it based off calories? Is it based off macronutrient distribution? Is there certain diets you favor? So let's assume everyone's eating a non-inflammatory diet. They've changed their habits and they're progressing towards their outcome. Now let's kind of throw some specifics out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends if we're talking fat loss or if we're talking hypertrophy. Or
well, look, I'd say start with two. Let's say most people you would assume want to lose body fat. Let's play with the two.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's start with fat loss.
Yeah.
So what do you do for fat loss now?
Fat loss, I'd go in.
The fundamentals are covered.
Yeah, I'd go in with a little bit higher protein requirements initially with someone. So I usually get, higher for me anyway, it'd be around 2 grams per kilo.
Okay, this is good information. Yeah. Beautiful.
But that is dependent. If someone's been training with me for a while, I'd back that off.
Yeah.
Usually I'd be sort of between 1.6. I actually prefer someone on a lower protein diet. But initially, if you're trying to get someone to drop body fat and trying to put on a little bit of muscle, you need to, in my experience anyway, I usually get better results at that sort of 2 grams per kilo, and that'd be for men. For women, it'd be a little bit less. It'd be like 1.8 to 1.7. But in saying that, it depends on the person's behavior change in terms of are they prepared to measure their foods, which most people aren't. So then I'd give them the framework that Precision Nutrition uses in terms of the measuring quantities of protein. And then if you get someone to weigh their food for, say, 5 days, then they can sort of start to eyeball quantities and they know, okay, this is 180 grams of chicken.
And you'll guide them.
Exactly.
By saying that, so you've started with protein. I think that's obviously the most important.
Yeah.
And then what about the rest of the macronutrients?
So the rest of it, the macros, I would have...
You're not really calorie counting, but you're macro prescribing.
They would have a lower carb initially for me. Now I know there's a lot of trainers that would go the opposite way and they'd introduce a lot more carbs. But I want
to know the Adam McCubbin method. This is what I'm asking.
So
what do you do, Cubbo?
Yeah, I'd always
give us some secrets.
I'd give them 2 starchy meals or per day, and then it'd be based around their training. So before and after their training.
So strategic placement of carbs. You can jot that down.
Yeah.
So you got protein distribution is important. Strategic placement of carbs. Now we're getting somewhere. This is good. What else you got for us?
And each meal has to have protein and fats and greens in it. It's non-negotiable. It's like if you're training with me and this is the food and you're compliant, you're going to do what I tell them to do. There's always greens on the plate. Yeah. There's always fats on the plate, and there's, depending on the person's body weight, etc., there's a portion of protein, lean protein. And now, obviously, when it gets trickier, when you get someone who's a vegan or vegetarian, it's not that you can't, intervene and create a better plan.
We're talking about probability here. There's anomalies on both sides of the curve. Absolutely. So we're not talking about anomalies, and I know that people maybe have trained for so many years, so they require, sometimes I don't even get fat at meals, whatever, but the general probability carbo program would be something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
There are anomalies for sure. So this is not for everyone, but probability-wise, roughly most people.
If I was to give an optimal,
suit most people.
If I'd give an optimal recommendation, that would be it.
Something like that.
Yeah. And obviously, we've spoken about it before, but just to highlight, the quality of the produce needs to be high in terms of grass-fed beef, game animals, free-range chicken, all that sort of stuff.
So the origin and source of the food.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've got quality macronutrients, protein distribution, and then you've got carb distribution, and then the non-negotiable rule of, did you say protein, fat, greens every meal?
Exactly.
Do you have like an amount of those protein, fat, greens as like 1 teaspoon of olive oil or like half an avocado? Is there like a measure you give? Like
you probably put that infograph online.
Yeah, I do actually. I have like an information pack that when everyone starts training with me, I'll send them like a booklet. And it'll have
how to portion these
guidelines of everything, and then it'll also just break down really simply what a macronutrient is, what a micronutrient is, water goal. So it'll give them how much water I expect them to drink. So it'll be 0.033 times their body weight in kilos. Gives them roughly their water consumption that I'd like them to have, and that's not including exercise. And then it'd have like a chart of the foods that I would recommend that you pick from each one. So, for example, I said protein, and I'll have a list of, say, 30 proteins that I'll recommend.
Can we have those lists?
Yeah. I can actually pull it up if you want.
I think we should show people these lists.
Yeah.
Do you also, with the water, do you have like a formula you use for like...
the formula. Yeah. So it's 0.033
and
then times your body weight in kilos. And I try and recommend waters that do have minerals in them, because a lot of people I don't know what it is here, but everyone's infatuated with having low sodium in their water.
Yeah.
Like you go into the supermarket and it's like low sodium, and it's like, well, you're just basically extracting the electrolytes from your water.
Yeah.
And disrupting pH balance and whatnot.
Exactly. And so I'd reintroduce, I'd say to them, there'd be little tips like, sprinkle a little bit of Celtic sea salt or Himalayan sea salt in your water to obviously help with hydration, reabsorption. Now, there's other things you can do in terms of electrolytes, and there's a million different options with supplementation. But usually for me, I try and cover everything that I possibly can through the diet first. Then, if they're open to it.
I mean, we're just trying to get as much free information as we can, so that's good. It's expensive cover, so we've got to make sure we get as much free info. Jeremy, what do you do? So you got, just to lay it out once again, I like repetitiveness, probably from my own bias. So basically what's going on is the person anymore, they're making progress to their goals, they're eating whole foods. So we can assume there's some kind of like fundamental nutrition concepts in there. Now, how do you get specific with a client, and do you favor any diets or strategies to get someone, exactly what they want to see? Because no one starts and wants an okay result. Let's assume that most people want a decent outcome.
Well, I think after that initial phase, I think most people are compliant and they will pretty much do whatever you tell them to do in terms of nutrition. So I generally get a lot of guys who I'll do a full macro calculation in terms of how many grams of protein, fat and carbs I would like them to have on a daily basis. Similar to Adam, I set a protein goal roughly about the same, 2.2 for a guy, and then 1.8 to 2 per kilo of body weight. And then from there...
How do you do your calories? This would be good for people
Well,
to hear.
I'm getting there.
Good. People, I'm sure there's people with notebooks and want this
so I generally
information.
calculate how much protein I need off lean body mass as opposed to total body mass.
So you've done their body fat too.
I've done their
probably
body
worth
fat
mentioning.
already.
With calipers.
With calipers, yeah.
Yep.
And then from there, I'll get their lean mass, and that's when I would basically calculate the protein first, and then I'll use the carbs and the fats on alternate days. So I'll still have fat on every day, but I'll have days where I have very low carbs.
Yeah.
And then I'll have days where I have much higher carbs rather than keeping those two stable. Whereas a protein, with the exclusion of a protein shake post-workout, the protein is pretty much stable every day of the week. There's no real change there. So I like to have 5 meals a day with most people if I can. Obviously with time constraints.
Theory behind that?
Then I'll do it. I just think that regular feeding is better than infrequent feeding.
Yeah. Why?
I like intermittent fasting, but I really only like it for someone who's really advanced.
What's the benefit? You say frequent eating.
I think that if you eat more regularly, you're less likely to crave food that probably doesn't fit in your diet.
Yeah.
I know myself, if I don't eat for 6 or 7 hours, the first thing I want to eat is like something that's, fast absorbing. I think that's just the way that...
Let's not dither around here. What, like a hamburger?
Yeah, so I think that's the way our brains work. We're programmed to eat something fast.
The best name for a hamburger I've ever heard.
Fast absorbing carbohydrates.
Exactly.
Yeah, sugar.
Exactly. And obviously, if you eat more frequently, then those things generally tend to not arise.
Yeah.
But I'll generally have days where I'll do upwards of 200 to 250 grams of carbs a day for a guy, and then maybe like 180 to 200 for a girl.
Yeah.
And then fats will be higher on the days when they don't have carbs, and a little bit lower on the days they do have carbs.
So let me try and dissect this. You go overall calories. You start with the protein based off lean body mass.
Yeah.
Then you will carb cycle based on probably body composition, body fat.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your carb cycling strategy in a minute. But and I guess the carb cycling is based on where they're at and what they want to achieve, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because can you give us probably everyone's heard about carb cycling and what your general belief system or strategy is behind how to do it. I know you've written an article on it, so it's probably worth checking out your page.
So for those who don't know, carb cycling...
Plug his website.
I think you wrote a really good one about carb cycling. I remember I read it thinking, he's got some good information. But just touch on it, Jeremy, because people probably want to try it and don't know how to do it.
For those who don't know what carb cycling is, it basically just means, in its simplest form, some days you have very low carbs and some days you have significantly more carbs. So I generally will write maybe 3 days of that higher end between 2 to 300 depending on their goals.
Yeah.
And then on the low end, maybe below 50 if they're looking to get lean. So if the goal is to drop body fat, I'll do obviously more days of lower carbs and less days of high carbs.
Okay, that's a good theory. Yeah.
If I think they're sort of more advanced, I might do a high, medium, and a low day.
Yeah.
Where similar to Adam, I'll have carbs before and after a workout on a high day. On a medium day, I might have just carbs post workout.
Yeah.
And a low day, I generally keep it pretty carb free.
Okay, and let's maybe dissect exactly why you would do that. So the reason why carb cycling, the reason between fat and carbs is both of them are optimal energy sources. One raises insulin, one doesn't. One takes a lot longer in Krebs cycle. So fat, for instance, that's why it takes a little bit to, curb your hunger. But then when it does, it keeps you fuller for longer. So basically, protein and carbs are your main energy sources, and you basically select them off what you're doing. So Cubbo said, and he puts his carbs around training. And for people that don't know, why would he do that? It's probably because when you weight train, you increase the need for glycogen, and carbs is the fastest source for that. So you could assume that insulin's going to shuttle that into the muscle cell, not the fat cell. And say, for instance, if you get your carb cycling wrong and you're having carbs at the wrong time, then possibly you're going to sabotage yourself because insulin has to work, get the blood sugar down before your body gets to work on doing something. So for instance, I'll give you an example of that and how that looks. If you're trying to lose body fat, and I think all of us like the protein and fat breakfast, and I'll tell you why. If you're going to train in the morning and have breakfast before you train, and then you have a high carbohydrate breakfast, does a few things on a neurotransmitter level and also a energy level. So we'll start with the energy level. You have carbs in the morning before you train, your body has to burn through that glucose before it gets into the fatty acids and freeze it up so you burn body fat. So you're kind of sabotaging your efforts to lose body fat. If say for instance you're not insulin sensitive, and how would you know that? Well, generally if you have probably more body fat than you would like, probably it's a good idea to keep insulin pretty low. So you have to burn through that glucose before your body starts burning body fat. The other thing is, if you look at neurotransmitters, there's 4 main ones: acetylcholine, dopamine, GABA, and serotonin. GABA and serotonin basically tell your body to relax, be happy, fall asleep. Dopamine and acetylcholine tell your brain to sort of have energy and concentrate. So we know if you're going to get up in the morning and you're going to have a high carb breakfast, that's why you feel drowsy at 10, because you've raised serotonin and GABA and you want to kind of fall asleep, which obviously leads to, not so great food choices after that, because you want another pick-me-up. So just added to the carb cycling, that's probably a little bit more background to probably why we're all pretty big on being very precise after you've done the fundamentals of nutrition with carbs and fat, because it does, it does control a lot. It does dictate how you feel.
I find as well, just performance in the gym, if you're looking to, increase their load each session, whether it's you're doing anaerobic work or you're doing strength work, I just find people train generally better with a little bit of carbs before. And I kind of guess that a little bit contradicts what you said if someone's training in the morning. But
no,
just
only if the body fat's high.
Yeah.
But for instance, if body fat's optimal, it's actually a good idea to have carbs.
What would you say is too high to have?
It's
carbs?
relative. So for instance, they're a long way off their goal, that's too high. But if they're pretty close and you can put them in safely, you want to kind of add carbs as soon as you can. For sure you do. Yeah. But it's like, so they're getting closer, they're almost there. That's probably when you put carbs in, but they're a long way off. For me, there's like exceptions to every rule. So where you would insert that or extract it is based on how far they're away from their outcome. Yeah. So if they're a long way from their body fat goals, for sure you're not going to, well, for me personally, I would not put carbs before their workout. But like you said, in an optimal world, I would love to put carbs pre and post for all my clients. But that would be making the assumption they're pretty much, body fat is almost where they want it to be, or it is where they want it to be. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'll just touch on the theory as well. So for me, specific nutrition comes down to, like Jeremy said, we do body fat, we have a look at where it is. I always, unless, just say for instance, you have a desire to change your body fat levels, then for me what I do is a 14-day reset, and that's eating foods that are low in inflammatory properties, but then it's also carbs like pretty much non-existent. So I use protein, fat and fiber as the main sources, and I add about 50 grams of carbs in a week.
Like a supplement fiber, or just like vegetables?
No, vegetables, through leafy greens predominantly. And then basically, so I track body fat every 2 weeks, we do measurements and we assess progress, and obviously the trend determines how much carbs you put in, but it seems like all of us agree that fat and carb manipulation is very, very big when it comes to body comp. Yeah. Probably general health, it's not so important, but when it comes to body composition, it definitely is. So I add roughly 50 grams of carbs a week, and then I reassess in 2 weeks, and then I'll work it out based off that. But generally I start quite aggressive. I'll go like 50 grams of fat, 30 or 40 grams of protein, and then 10 grams of carbs, and then I'll increase the carb ratios as I track the trend. Does that make sense? So yes.
Per meal?
What's that?
30, so 50?
No, percent overall.
Oh, percent. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, I wipe the slate clean, keep carbs low, add carbs in, and just watch what happens with body comp. Yeah. Seems like it's pretty much quite common.
Yeah. And so what would you guys do if you had someone who said, look, I'm not prepared to measure how many carbs I'm having before or after?
Good question.
Because a lot of the guys that I work with, I'll tell them, and I have to make it as simple as possible in terms of, piece of fruit, because they're just not going to get it if I make it too complicated.
Yeah, so you go general concepts.
Yeah.
I think even one step further is like, where can I order from that's reasonably healthy?
Yeah, Deliveroo strategies are the real thing in this. You need a good Deliveroo strategy.
I'll give clients who are less compliant like that a list of food delivery outlets that have items on their menu that I would recommend.
Yeah.
Well, it probably comes down to Cubbo's charts, if we can get a hold of those. I have charts too. Why would we have charts? Because it's like, you have a basic bunch of so this meal, like you said, if you don't want to, I don't even like weighing carbs. I sort of eat on appetite now. And just eat nourishing foods, because it's really hard to overeat whole foods, right? That's one of the reasons why we put it in earlier. So yeah, like it's knowing what kind of carbs to have. And to be honest, whether it's aesthetic, I mean, health for sure, you'll address eating like that. And to be honest, more than likely, you'll reach your aesthetic goal doing that anyway. It's only really you need to be specific if A, you want a faster result, or B, you want a really, really lean result, right? But for most people, actually just knowing the quality of carb or the quality of fat, having lists like probably we all give our clients, and like Jeremy said, like whether it's Deliverooing, knowing, you know, rice, sweet potatoes good versus, you know, maybe a gluten heavy bread or something like that. So it's more about educating what carbs are good, what fats are good, what proteins are good.
The thing that I've used recently with some of my clients is actually putting them on a delivery meal plan. So whether it's Athletes or Pura, and you know, they might not love it in terms of the taste and the flavor, but I personally, some people, because if you're coming from like,
I'm just checking, I don't know.
Yeah, if you're coming from a McDonald's diet and you go straight into Pura or Athlete or one of those deliveries, you know, it's a lot, you know, more plain, the food.
Yeah.
But the thing that I like about putting people on those plans is that you take out all the guesswork, because you communicate to the food company and say, I want you to give them, you know, 130 grams of chicken in the morning. I want you to give them so much sweet potato. And so all they have to do is eat it. And then the secondary thing that they get from that as well is the learning. So they learn, okay, they see the meal, they go, okay, there's some greens here, there's sweet potato on this meal, etc. And then from there, then you can take them off it. But I do that as like a recognition. Yeah, I do that as like a teaching method.
And what do you look for in a food company? For anyone that maybe wants to do a food company, like what makes a food company good?
The principles that we spoke about in terms of whole foods.
Yeah.
So vegetables, and I think it's hard sometimes to know whether it's fresh.
There's a lot of food services out there.
Yeah, and I think
there's a bad one out there, to be honest. I think they all hold value, and I think if someone is, you know, on that level where they have no idea and they start with any of those companies, they're going to get a result.
Exactly, it's going to be better than what they were eating, and as long as it's some sort of like fresh produce, because I've had some bad experiences with some of the companies that I won't name on the podcast, but you get a defamation
suit or anything.
You get the foods and you're like, I'm not sure this is actually that fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what? What do you think about in terms of calories? I often find when I first sit down and have a chat with someone, they're probably eating significantly less calories than they probably should on a daily basis.
I find with a lot of people is initially they're underreporting as well. You get them, they'll forget to include, you know, I had this
sauces.
Yeah, and then on the weekend, you know, they'll have like their cheat meal, and they might have like, you know, 4,500 calories in that thing during the week.
I think you guys are talking about me, right? I'm right here, you know.
So I mean, we're all guilty of it. I have cheat meals on the weekend, and my calories do go up on the weekend, so I'm not alone there. But I think generally, yeah, exactly,
doesn't make you a bad person.
No, and that comes down to probably the overarching theme, I think, for nutrition, for when you get a new client, is a level of awareness of what they're eating.
Well, what Jack said about honesty, being truthful with yourself and say, well, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm eating, and now we can make changes together to get a result.
And because a lot of people will have that perception, this is healthy, you know, nut butters, whatever. It's like, you've just eaten 1,500 calories worth of peanut butter. Yeah. Or, you know, nut butter or whatever it is. Yeah, it might be perceived as a whole food or a healthy food, but, you know, at the end of the day, if you're in a calorie surplus and you're trying to lose body fat, it's not really going to work.
What's the surplus calorie for anyone that might not know?
So you've got your basal metabolic rate, so which is what you basically need in terms to stay alive, and then on top of that, which I'm sure that you guys factor into your calories as well as their activity levels. Now, different formulas will say different calories, so I'm not like stuck in one model, but it's just for relativity, you need to follow obviously.
You find the output.
Yeah, exactly.
Step one, find the output.
And it's not always 100% with people with, you know, reporting different, you know, densities of foods.
It's a starting point.
Yeah, it's a starting point.
And then how do you create it? What is the deficit? What is the surplus?
Well, I think one thing we probably haven't spoken about yet is Dubai's quite unique in the fact that we don't really do any cardio work that's not in a gym. So if you don't go to a gym, you don't exercise.
To be to Dubai Mall, I would do a lot of walking.
You can potentially go from your house into your car, drive to the doorstep of your work, get the elevator up, and you very rarely get 10,000 steps or get anywhere near 20
Absolutely.
minutes of movement a day if you don't go to the gym.
So you're probably going to have to take some ownership to that, I reckon.
So with that basal metabolic rate, I think in this country the basal metabolic rate's a little bit lower than it would be somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, physical activity in general would be down. So I don't know where you'd find this data, but in terms of like steps and movement versus somewhere like London or Melbourne or New York, where they're like essentially walking cities, Dubai is a freeway city. It's
That's a very good variable to consider.
Yeah, if you walk on the highway or the freeway in Dubai, you're pretty much guaranteed to be
skilled.
Yeah.
Mutilated.
Yeah.
No, so just to sum that up, so basically you find the calories and then basically that you put out per day, and then obviously you eat a little bit less. That's called a deficit. And
Exactly,
then if you eat too much, it's called a surplus.
Yeah.
And the basic energy balance rule to lose body fat is to eat slightly less than you put out.
Yeah.
As an energy balance rule.
Yeah. But I think generally, and I think you guys would probably agree as well, having your calories and carbs undulating as well. I would never tell someone to eat exactly the same foods every day unless they want to stay exactly the same as what they are in their current shape. But in general, just for health, I think it's better for someone just from a overall health and hunger to have days where it's a high day and to have low days as well.
Okay,
agreed.
so that's good. So basically, we've just gone through principles and probably some strategies that everyone wants to maybe consider on how they then so after your initial phase, you get your patterns and rituals right. We kind of touched a little bit more on specifics. Probably welcome any questions on exact specifics. So let's probably move into, so you've got an idea when you wake up every day, you know what to eat and when. So let's establish that. So what about movement? Like how do you guys prescribe a training program? What kind of movement should people do, and how do you determine that?
Well, for me, I'd expect people to hit a minimum standard of movement, and I assess that through a functional movement screen. It's by Gray Cook, a guy who developed it, and he uses it with a lot of the top athletic populations in America, but also uses it with the Army and Marines and that sort of stuff as well. But I find just having minimum standards that you get people to, whether it's a squat, not necessarily you need to have everyone doing a squat, doing a lunge, doing a bend, but just having the fundamentals that they can perhaps touch their toes, they can get into a below parallel squat. There's certain standards in that which I try and get people to, whether it's mobility, stability, or just flexibility. So I find a lot of the guys that I see, you can pigeonhole a lot of the corporates, especially the guys in Dubai. They're classic like tight thoracic spine, hips, anterior aspect of the hips is like super tight. And just from that, if you just focus on those two areas, I usually focus on those two areas when I first get someone.
Get movement, posture, and considerations of their job. Maybe is that what the two areas?
Yeah,
are?
I mean, but just for general, if you're going to take someone,
because you've never trained before in your life, and then they come and see you. That's what you look at.
Yeah, and I'd qualify them for the lifts that I was going to take them into.
But why should they lift? Like, can you give us a bit more information on that? Well, why strength training, yoga? There's so many ways to train. Yeah. Group classes. There's Barry's boot camp. There's spin. Like, how do you like? Obviously, probably we're going to all have strong biases towards bespoke strength training, but like, can you give us an idea of what they should do and why?
I think the best form of exercise is the one that they're actually going to do.
Yeah.
So for me, I know what I personally like, and I know what I think is the best for them. But if they...
Well, that's what we want to know.
Yeah.
There's so many different liberal answers, but like your answer.
Yeah, well, my answer would be predominantly like strength training and a mixture of anaerobic and aerobic training as well.
That's because you think it's the most efficient road home?
True, yeah. But not just for body composition, hypertrophy. They're probably not... The third one for me is health, so long-term health as well. So they're three facets that I always look at in training. But they're, like in terms of strength training, then you open like Pandora's box in terms of structural balance, which you guys have obviously gone through with Charles Poliquin.
But what is it?
Well, structural balance is, any asymmetry that a person might have or weaknesses in a muscle group.
It's like posture.
Yeah.
And strength balance.
Yeah, but mobility, it's not... It's how they move as well. So you can have someone...
This is good information,
Yeah.
People often don't consider this. They just want to go, how do I burn as much calories and look pretty?
Yeah.
But there's more to the story.
No, exactly.
Building a structure that can withstand whatever you're going to do, plus long term.
Yeah, well, and there's efficiency to it as well. Like you can get 10 people doing a squat and you can have 10 different looking squats.
Yep.
Just because of limb length, mobility restrictions, height, all that sort of stuff plays into it. There's minimum standards that I try and get people to with that. Now, I've trained in the past, just to use a bit of a analogy, I've trained a yoga teacher before, and her limiting factor obviously wasn't mobility and flexibility. She's like hypermobile.
And not strong in that range.
And not strong.
Yeah,
You'd put a bar on her back and she'd go into a squat and she'd bend in like Gumby. And so for her, it was all about, developing tightness and positional awareness in those positions with a load. Whereas a lot of people that I see in Dubai, they won't be able to get into those positions. So for me, I try and create an environment for them to get into those positions safely.
So like human engineering.
Yeah.
So you want to make the body move as efficiently as possible by addressing posture.
Yes. Yeah.
This is good. And it's super important.
But I think posture is static though. So I try and, it's more in like a dynamic range. So when you do an assessment, there's passive tests that you can do, like a forward bend.
Yeah, like touch your toes.
Yeah,
like
can you get your arms above your head? But as soon as you give them a bar, there can be, heaps of other factors that come into it.
Let's get some more like how that actually looks. So basically you want to take someone that basically gets out of a chair, doesn't train much, and then your first kind of concept is to get them to squat, to pull, to lunge, to basically perform movement fundamentally correct and as efficient as possible. That's like the number one strategy.
Risk minimization.
Yeah, so they're moving well, their hips are loose. If you picture every joint in your body, it's strong and flexible.
Yeah, because if you get someone who's limited with their ankle range and you're like, ask to grass squat is the best squat you can get, and then all of a sudden they got like lower back pain, their shoulders hurt because they can't get the bar on their back. It's like, well, it's not the best exercise for them.
It's like that saying, you can't fire a cannon out of a canoe, right?
Exactly.
You need that strong foundation, and then you can plug movement in.
Yeah, and it comes back to, I think what we all do well is it's kind of bespoke. So what one person brings in, like I'm not going to train them the same as someone else.
And that, like, it's good to know that you're very, very precise, let's call it, with posture and dynamic efficiency, maybe let's call it something like that. So you basically, if you saw Adam McCubbin, you can expect to move really well and have an even balance of strength throughout the body in all movements that you wish to perform.
Yeah, because for me, it's all about longevity. Like, you could get someone to a body fat percentage goal, you could get them to a weight loss goal quicker if you bypassed a lot of that, like structural balance.
Well, that's interesting, So there's a small trade-off, you think?
Yeah, initially. But if you're playing the long game, they're going to get better results in the long term. But short term, like if someone's like, I've got 6 weeks, I've got to get to a photo shoot. Like, you're going to really fuck around with all that stuff at the start.
Sure. So movement's number one.
Yeah.
And then how else do you plan, like how else do you tell a client, like how do you select the best movement strategy for them? Because they've eaten well, they've done a posture and say dynamic movement assessment, you've kind of corrected imbalances, so we could assume now that person's moving well, they're standing up a bit taller, their joints are strong. What do you then do after that?
Well, for me, it's just, I guess in my own training, I love the classic barbell lifts.
Yeah. This is what we want to hear.
Yes.
Because everyone puts up some generic, crap. But let's get to some specifics and why. So like barbell movement, fantastic. Let's speak more about that and what it is and why you do it.
For me, I just enjoy that style of training.
For clients or for you personally?
Well, for me personally, but I think as coaches, we have our biases, and I think we train the people how we, in fact, like to train ourselves as well.
You need to have some opinion, I think. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a bit of nothing. So that's we all have our biases for a reason. That we, like you said at the start, we all probably get the same outcome in a different way. And then essentially what we're trying to probe here is how you do it.
Yeah. So for me, I love doing the barbell lifts, and I think you can tell a lot by a person.
Because a lot of people are going to be intrigued right now. Like, barbell lifts, like what is it? How do I do it?
Yeah. Well,
that's what I want to know. Actually.
Essentially, like your squat, your deadlift, bench press, they're like your three. So your big three. And I think in terms of muscle recruitment, and if you have a short amount of time with someone in the gym, those are effective lifts versus your isolation. Now, it's not to say that isolation doesn't have a place, because it's important. But for me, I'm not going to.
Has to be too kind, yeah.
I'm not going to if someone comes in and says I want to lose, 10 kilos in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
I'll get them good at the basics in terms of barbell lifts.
Because they have the most difference in the shortest possible time.
Yeah, exactly. And then dispersely, I'll put in accessory exercises. For example, if they're struggle with a lockout position on a bench press, I might throw in accessory isolation work like a JM press or something that's going to focus on the long head of the tricep so they can get that lockout strength.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's specific to that person.
Because they're moving well, they're efficient, and then they do mostly barbell, big compound lifts.
But I must say...
That's the general carbo theory. And of course, you could plug anything into anything.
Yeah.
Give someone some insight to how you work. That's pretty good, right?
Yeah. But I must say, though, I wouldn't plug everyone into like a barbell squat or a deadlift.
It's more probability. We have to talk probability and have to put up some kind of insight. Otherwise, it's going to be vague as hell.
And there would be a period where you'd be focused on structural balance. There'd be a lot of unilateral work, split squats, reverse Bulgarian split squats, that sort of stuff that build up, to take out a lot of the asymmetries that they might have built up as well.
Maybe we'll have to do a video in the gym with all of us. We'll do a workout each and explain why.
Shirts off.
That'd be good. Whatever your target market is, cover. Jeremy, how do you plan a strength program? Like, how do you someone they haven't moved before, they come in, how do they even move, and what do you recommend? Give me the Jeremy Gwyer thing, not the overall. Give us a look at how you work.
So most people, I like to get them strong in a stable base first. So I unlike how I use a lot of machines.
Yep.
So I prefer...
This is good, bit of diversity here.
The initial phases.
Good, fantastic. Why?
Well, one, I think they can feel the muscle that I want them to feel a lot better.
Yep.
So for instance, if you're doing a hamstring curl, as opposed to maybe a deadlift or a remaining deadlift where posture and joint flexibility becomes an issue, you can target the hamstrings. They can feel that muscle almost from rep one. So if I can get people feeling the working muscle, I find they almost buy in to the program a bit more, because they say, well, I can actually feel my hamstring or my bicep or my whatever working when he told me I should feel this muscle. So they feel like they're doing it right.
So you start with something less complicated, but more sort of rewarding brain-wise.
Yeah,
you can feel it straight
I think
away.
both why. Like, I think that machines, in my opinion, have like a really, really valuable place in the gym, because you can overload the muscle without causing any issues like lower back pain, or where, like, if you're doing a squat, for instance, if you do any more than 10 reps, your core strength and your lower back strength probably going to play a bigger role than your legs.
Yeah.
Whereas, for instance, if you're doing a leg press or a hack squat, you could probably push those reps up to 15, 20, 25 and elicit like a greater, lactate level, which is obviously better for fat loss, as opposed to doing 10 reps on a squat.
Yeah.
So a lot of my guys will do a lot of machine work to start with. That might be the first.
So just quickly, obviously you have
Not
a
all
bias
machines.
towards strength training though. If
Yes.
someone comes and they want to change their physique and health, straight strength training.
Yeah, I think that's really like the foundation.
This is when people want to know if they see Jeremy
Yeah.
Gwyer, what happens.
I will generally do, in one workout, you might do anywhere between 16 and 20 sets of strength training.
Good.
Maybe 12 to 16 sets. Then I'll do some work of anaerobic work, so sled pushing, assault bike, ski erg, rower, some interval sort of training.
Yeah.
And then by themselves, I'll ask them to do some sort of low intensity, steady state cardio, whether that be walking the mall, walking the dogs, taking the kids to the park, playing
Fun
sport,
stuff.
something that's...
What would your guidelines be for that, like in terms of duration?
Anything more than 20 minutes is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, if most people can get a hold of a step counter or a Fitbit or an iWatch, so if you can get close to that 10,000 step mark, I reckon you're well on the way to getting closer to that, that calorie burn you need every single day.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you're doing weight training, you're going to burn a greater amount of calories over the long term. But I think if you have days where you're doing nothing,
Just why is that?
obviously when you work out cardio wise, you're burning calories in the time that you're doing cardio. Just so you walk on the treadmill for 20 minutes. When that 20 minutes is up, you're really not burning many more calories. But when you weight train, you're going to probably burn calories for the next 24 or 48 hours when your muscles are recovering.
So if anyone wants to Google that, it's called EPOC, EPOC. You can check the acronym out. That's a very good point.
So that's the way I structure. I do strength training and HIIT work on the same day, and then I'll have days where they do cardiovascular work by themselves. But I think you really need to be lifting weights 4 times a week. As well, depending on if they're really beginner, you can get away with 3, but I think 4 is optimal.
Yeah, and I like what you said about that they can feel the muscle, because a lot of times proprioception, when you get especially a beginner, they don't have any idea where they're supposed to be feeling it. You have a million people, not a million, but I've had a lot of people, especially women, that have never trained before, and you get them on like a bench press and they're like, where do you feel it? And they're like, oh, my biceps are getting sore. I'm like, you sure about that?
Well, she's probably sure, but has no idea how to recruit it. So probably neurological programming is
but
just
building
as
up
important.
that perception is huge, whether it's even for your barbell lifts, just being aware of your body. But if you're coming back the other way to machine lifts,
this is a good contrast, actually.
To know about which muscle I think is powerful
and have some awareness
for anything.
I've got no doubt that I think barbell lifts are probably better long-term longevity-wise. I've just found that and I've done a lot of barbell work with my clients, I just found that results seem to happen faster when I can push them harder on a machine, because they don't necessarily get that fatigue in the joint, or there's no sort of limiting factors.
Kind of well guided, right?
Yeah. You can push, you can do half reps, you can do partials, you can do drop sets, you can do supersets. Whereas if someone does a squat, almost like they need time to rest afterwards. Yeah. And if someone's coming in, you want to sort of get them moving and sweating because they want to feel that burn. Yeah. Sometimes I feel that,
And that's why I think the sleds are awesome, because you can load the sled up with 5-6 plates, get someone to push a huge heavy load, and there's minimal risk on the joints, the structural stuff.
I mean, you can finish your workout in 6 minutes on those assault bikes.
I know.
After that, they're done.
That's probably my most hated apparatus in the gym,
because you get cardio and lactate, right?
It's not just cardio. It's something I actually feel like I got the flu after I finished using it.
But it's guaranteed.
It's all over.
Guaranteed. If you push yourself for 30 seconds on that bike, I don't care how fit you are, you can fall off the bike.
Makes sense. So how I lay it out.
Well, Jacko, just before we go on, what is your approach to
strength training? Okay, so it's based off body fat norms. So generally I like to get women around 16% just over the years. But just look, if you don't have an aesthetic goal, then probably it's quite a balanced regime. But let's assume you do, because that's what most people come and see me for. So hopefully this resonates. I try and get men around 10-12%, women around 16 to 20%. So just say, for instance, I find that at that point, both male and female could probably stand there in a bikini and not pinch too much body fat. So how does that happen? Well, I try and initially plan. So the first port of call is exactly what you do, Cubbo. We look at structural balance, strength deficiencies. So we look at posture, we look at where you're strong, where you're weak, and we correct that. Because there's just no way you can progress forward if you don't actually address those issues. So once someone's structurally balanced, the question then becomes, well, what's the best road home? And the way to do that for me is, most people will train full body until they literally stand in front. Think about this. If you stand in front of the mirror and you can pinch body fat that you don't want, probability-wise, I'll train them full body. And what that means is a squat, it's a push, it's a pull, it's a lunge, it's a hamstring, it's a lower back, and an abs. So we can be more specific on that, but basically every session you'll train every muscle of the body in a certain way. And I pair that, based off proven methods. I like German body composition. When I say I like it, I abuse it. I love it. Most people do it until, like I said, so you do full body training. Well, first you get structurally balanced, then you do full body training. I like German body comp. It's probably worth anyone checking out what that is if you don't know. That's basically full body movements paired together to create a lactic and aerobic response simultaneously. So I use that program generally to get someone to their ideal body fat. So at which point, let's assume that on the calipers, people are lean enough because they're strong and they're aesthetically lean and healthy because we've addressed joint health and whatnot. At which point it then becomes specific. So say you stand in front of the mirror in a bikini or in shorts and you can't grab much body fat, you love the way and how lean you are body fat wise, then it becomes a question of specific, women call it shaping, but men call it muscle gain. And then at which point I switch to more of a physique-based program where we start to be specific. So you shred body fat, get to a certain body fat percent using full body methods, and then we actually switch to splits. So whether it's a guy, he might train chest and arms one day, and it's basically subjective at this point. I like to get everyone lean first, and then it becomes a subjective goal. Like women might say, I want better legs, better abs, whatever, more butt. And then I'd be specific, and that whole workout for that person might be just butt, right? And then for men, after they're as lean as they want, they might say, well, actually, I would love my arms to be a bit thicker, my chest to be thicker. And then that's when we switch to specific response. And that's generally physique training. And that could mean a combination of machines and compound lifts. There's all sorts of things that you can plug in, but basically all of it's reverse engineered on what you want to see. And it's always get lean first by training full body, always. And then when you're as lean as you can't pinch any fat. Then it's kind of like shaping specifically. And it's if you just, I've had a lot of people just get lean and like it. And then I say, well, what do you want to do now? Do you just want to do, I've had people that so they get their goal body fat and they're really happy with the way they look. And then what I actually do is get them to train less. So what happens is I get them to keep that result using less effort. And when we talk about longevity, that's a good strategy. So yeah, the whole game changes when you get as lean as you want, because then you decide if you want to shape more, get more lean muscle in certain areas, or you're happy with the way you look and then you kind of want to spend less time in the gym, which is also a fantastic goal too. And people don't realize that. I've had people train 4 or 5 times a week with me, get the body fat that they want, and can go down to 1 or 2 shorter sessions and they maintain, because maintenance is a different question than change. So that's basically how I engineer the strength training program.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we didn't touch on there is just also strength, because if you get someone to a level of a base level of strength or to a high level of strength, that whether you switch to a bodybuilding style split program, their percentages are going to be much higher. So if you have someone who comes in and they can bench press, say 60 kilos for 10 reps, and then you go try and get them into a bodybuilding program versus someone who can bench press 100 kilos for 10 reps, their work rate is going to be like far superior when they go into a aesthetic type of program, whether it's bodybuilding or whether they're, I think overall, if they're strong, they can then sort of pick their own adventure in terms of what they want to do. So a lot of times I'll indirectly guide people and try and make them as strong as possible without actually telling them a lot of times, unless they're into it. I'm trying to make them strong.
What kind of wizardry is this cover?
Yeah. But I just find that and I find a lot with guys as well. You start telling them, okay, I've got this intermittent sort of goal for you. For the end of the year, I want you to press, say, 40 kilos for 6 reps on, your dumbbell press. And when you tell someone like that, they're like, okay, well, he's got goals for me as well.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'll tell them that just to see how they respond a lot of times. And sometimes people they don't care. They're just like, just tell me what to do. And then, it happens a lot where they'll just sort of hand over the keys and they'll say, you just do what it is you're doing. But a lot of times I'll drop little bits of information, like, I'm trying to get you to do this because I want you to do X.
Yeah.
And then when their ears prick up and they're like, oh yeah, that sounds good, then you've got a little bit more buy-in with what it is you're doing, and they might, I guess, be a little bit more motivated to come back and then do that extra set or that to try and push a little bit harder.
Because it's obvious progression too. Sometimes body comp can stall. Sometimes there's certain times in your career when you're busy, but that's a good immediate feedback system.
Yeah.
Because you can see progression. And a lot of people don't realize that you're going to reach plateaus and fat loss is not linear, muscle gain is not linear. But if you're making progress on a strength level, well, then you can actually understand that you are getting better. Also, conversely, if you don't get strong, it does reveal information that's important too. Like maybe your adrenals aren't functioning well, your joints aren't recovering properly. So monitoring strength can reveal a lot of good information.
Yeah.
And it's definitely worth tracking.
Yeah, and also with perception, like particularly in the Middle East, I've found a lot of the guys I work with here, not naming any people, but their work rate and perception, they think they're working harder than they actually are.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you guys have encountered that.
In the gym or in life?
Well, I think the gym's actually a metaphor for life in terms of the way someone attacks their workout. I see a lot of correlation with...
Yeah, the ego's writing checks they can't cash.
Exactly.
That's not Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
It probably happens, and that's why, obviously collecting data can reveal trends, which obviously keeps you accountable. So being accountable is, that's a huge variable. You probably could do a podcast on that on its own, but tracking numbers and trends are probably the essence of progression if you think about it. But let's kind of sum it up. Probably the last variable, if we have time, is just maybe some quick ideas of supplementation. So we've kind of ran through nutrition, we've kind of ran through training. I'd say the probably third one is supplementation. What do you kind of start with? What do you recommend? And again, just like the Carbo program, because everyone, there's anomalies, there's all kinds of, it's hard to give anyone a specific consult. So what we're really looking for is core principles, that you sort of roll out regularly. Yeah.
Well, for me, like I mentioned before, I'd attack nutrition is the first port of call. Doesn't matter who it is, I'd always go into nutrition first. Yeah. Then several weeks in, whether it's 4 weeks, whether it's 6 weeks, it really just depends on the individual. If they're open to getting blood work done, which most people are, I'd get them just a general blood test, covering off all the main sort of nutrients. And
what test would you recommend?
Usually, the biggest one is a no-brainer, and I think most people in the Middle East are probably deficient in is vitamin D. So I'd get vitamin D and just all the red blood cell in terms of seeing, the lymphocytes, just the whole spectrum. You can sort of see how their diet's going, but I'd also do fasting glucose. Fasting glucose is not, the most accurate, but it does give you an indication of where someone is initially. And then if they came back with a elevated fasting blood glucose, then I'd send them off and get them to do a glucose tolerance test would be the next one. So then you get to see insulin
every couple of hours. Then one.
So I think it goes for 2 hours.
But going on the supplements, is this how you prescribe supplements, by doing blood work first?
Well, blood work is not always based off supplements, but I think as a general protocol, the first supplements that I'd introduce to people would be a multivitamin. It's just more of a shotgun approach. They may or may not be deficient in certain minerals, and without really going into functional medicine, we don't know if they're deficient and whether their food source has got enough selenium, whether they've got enough, the B vitamins, etc. So I'd start them on a multi, and then it'd be like magnesium would be the other one. Yeah. The second one would just be...
So most of your clients would get this, just so we can paint a picture here.
Yeah, exactly. I think generally if you weight train...
and just quickly brands? Because probably people want to buy it. So,
I'm actually a little bit... I'm not as much as a brand snob in terms of magnesium, because I just... A lot of people think that magnesium citrate is an ineffective form of magnesium, but I actually would refute that, and I think magnesium citrate is actually really good, but it's just you need to know how to dose that, and if you dose it too much, you will get loose stools. But I think generally...
No one wants that.
Sorry?
No one wants that.
No, exactly. But I actually... and there's the thorn ones, there's the Poliquin ones. If money's no object, then I'd send them and try and get them on all... your different sources of magnesium. But if someone's just like in the beginning stages, I would just get them on magnesium citrate would be the first one that I'd get them on.
So multi and mag, that's your go-to.
They're my 2. And then, it depends on the person. If I suspect there's a lot of inflammation and their diet's been bad for a long period of time, then there'd be fish oil in there as well. But that's like my first port of call. And then as the relationship develops and we see each other for longer, there might be other things that we start to throw in there. But as a shotgun approach, there'd be like your 3.
As a general rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Jeremy?
This is not really a supplement, but I always tell everyone to get on bone broth first thing in the morning and last thing at night if possible. Clean Living Company, the guys that I use here.
It's good, great company. I love them.
Great company.
Yeah.
Good company. I felt like I was obligated to.
No, I tell people exactly what I do. and I think that the bone broth is a great product with the prebiotics, the collagen. I think it's something that just can benefit so many different things in your life, and I always tell people to take that to start with. Similar to Adam, a multi. I like ATP. I started using those this year, and it's probably the only multi that I use when I'm not using it. I can notice the difference.
The multi-food?
The multi-food, yeah.
What difference do you notice?
I just find that I'm just, my mood and my energy is just not as...
I think I know when you don't take one. No, I was joking.
Yeah, I just find my
Has
energy...
he had one today or no?
That's why he's missing sleeps on the couch. He's like, you take multi again?
No, I think actually I find that I don't ever press snooze when I'm using multi-food.
Yeah.
That's a big call. There you go, man.
Very rarely
You heard it first. You don't want to press snooze?
I jump out of bed.
A quick free plug for ATP supplement.
It's quite a correlation, that.
Exactly.
I've just, yeah.
Yeah.
So
multi, bone broth, and probably the D3 as well. Like, I think if you go too many supplements, I know myself as well that if you have too many things to take, you forget to take them. So I would stick with those three, and that would be it.
Yeah.
And
And you also don't know which one's effective. If you take 10,
too many, exactly.
it's like which one's working.
I mean, there's workout supplements you can take, protein, creatine, glutamine, these sort of things. But I think to start with, you need to get the basics right. Obviously, we're talking about the foundations today. So for me, it would be multi, D3, and the bone broth.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I probably missed one. I actually do...
You can't change your answer. No.
I'm changing it now. Would be... most people would be on a protein shake, I think, because a lot of people
It's a great
ATP.
debate.
would... I'd say my protein, they're really good.
I'm not laughing because they're not good. Don't worry, my protein.
No. But I generally actually do think their protein is
My
good.
protein have got more athletes than China, mate.
Exactly. But I find a lot of people, if you're coming from a low base in terms of your diet, most people undereat protein anyway. So if you're throwing in a supplement form, it's an easy one to get in. In an ideal world, I think you'd probably eat all your protein meals, unless you're training for not body composition, whether it's hypertrophy. I'd probably introduce it in that. But if it's just general health, I'd try and get them to eat all their protein. But yeah, it's an easy one. I think, and generally people are quite open to taking protein shakes.
Makes sense. I would start with probiotics and digestive enzymes on the basis that, we always say you are what you absorb and you are what you don't excrete. So basically, the way food's made, I think, I can go right into this, but I'll give you a general sort of overlook at why. If you look at the way they just churn soil over now, you don't really get many enzymes that help you break down foods. And plus, if you look at the production line of foods, I find that, most people have problems now with bloating and water retention. I think a lot of that comes down to digestive issues. And I think a lot of it can be alleviated with a broad spectrum enzyme and probiotic. You can be specific, but let's just call it that. So you are what you absorb and you are what you don't excrete. So I always start with those two. A multi is just your overall general health. And to be honest, I'm probably a little bit more aggressive with, say, supplements than you guys. But it's because, if you have too much multi, you urinate it out. Most of it's water soluble, and then it also makes sure it ensures that you top up your vitamins to a good level. And if you get a really good quality one, I think going back to what you said before, we need to pretty much start looking at supplements. They're here to stay. It's not like they're not like because they come in a capsule, they have like a medication association. But I think we need to start looking at supplements as food, because essentially it's the best version of the food that we're not getting anymore. Because if you look at the way food's made and logistically handled, it's not like you go and pluck a tomato out of the local fields anymore. And I think so I like probability. So if you look at what's deficient in foods anymore, I just generally like to top that up with some quality supplements. So I start with the digestive enzymes, probiotics, and then a broad spectrum multivitamin, and that keeps your cellular level quite healthy. And then I like zinc and mag. I just think that there's a lot of toxins in the water and the environment, and zinc helps excrete that. Magnesium is fantastic for basically, I think if you look at sleep deprivation, it's a massive issue at the moment. So magnesium's just my go-to sleep supplement, because if you get the right chelate, like you kind of touched on before, it kind of shuts the central nervous system on and allows you to get into a deep sleep. And then the only one I would add is fish oil, just for overall anti-inflammatory properties, because there's so many things in the environment that cause inflammation. even like your phone, even just any form of stress creates some kind of inflammation, and at the root of every disease is inflammation. And then also, if you look at inflammation, probably to give everyone an example, it's like you have cells, and then let's say inflammation as an analogy is kind of like fire. So before your body wants to do anything pleasurable, it has to put the fire out before it gets on to doing stuff like losing body fat, concentrating, having energy. So the lower your inflammation levels in your body, the more highly functioning it is. So I'm very, and I think you definitely wrote a good article on this, I know for sure. Inflammation, it's probably worth checking that out. I'm plugging Cubbo here, but no, honestly, if you can get your inflammation down, I think it's a plausible place to look, because it is more and more prevalent as we go on. And then going back to the first two, so is gut health. I think the more and more we study the gut microbiome, the more we're coming up with the uncanny effects of it. Like you can eat more food, lose more body fat. That's kind of a fun one. But it's also, there's a medical convention every year called the gut is the second brain, because it does control all your feel-good hormones, your concentration hormones. So yeah, I like to just have a look at like what's commonly deficient around the world and just kind of plug that into a general default program. Now, of course, you don't have to take all of them, but I do recommend, I mean, for me personally, the way I see it is I'll probably take an enzyme, a probiotic, magnesium, zinc, mag, and fish oil for the rest of my life, no question. And, I buy my family and send them that because I want them to take it. Just because I've seen too much data to show otherwise. So I'd start with them, and then the doses are obviously dependent on the individual. And if someone believes it's too much, I'm all for that. Actually, this is just my belief, that I can cut that right down. And some people don't even take supplements that I train. But if you were to explore it, they're the ones to take. And hopefully I've given you a good summary of why, if that makes sense. No,
it's awesome. Very, very descriptive.
So I think that probably gives you an idea of the three biggest variables, say maybe establishing your outcome. We looked at nutrition, we looked at training, we looked at supplementation. I think that's a good place to start. And anything else to maybe add to this?
I think, we should open it up to listeners as well to get some feedback on what they would like to know a little bit more about as well.
Yeah, maybe we said something they want more information on or something like that.
And we'll make this a regular thing if we get some good feedback. If we don't get good feedback, you guys...
No, we'll still make it regular, don't worry. I don't mind speaking on deaf ears, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, either way, it's still fun.
But yeah, okay, so I'd say that probably sums it up. If probably for the listeners, if they have any specifics or they want us to elaborate on things more, let's do that. But probably the next week, I think we talk about how to stay compliant. I think that's probably a good one. So you've set it up, you've jumped into it, and then how do you stay like focused? You know what I mean? Like after the 2 weeks, after the month phase of being motivated, and the reality kicks in of long-term change. Probably that's the next discussion we might want to explore.
No, good.
It's been fun talking shop with you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Well, we'll see you here this time next week.
Stay healthy, Dubai.
Yeah.